Hello and welcome to Feeling Blue, a podcast by the Conservative Mental Health Group. And we're very, very excited because this is our first ever podcast of Feeling Blue. We decided we wanted to get a load of Conservatives together to talk about mental health. And we are delighted today to have our President, Mark Prisk, as our first guest. Mark was a former MP and it was a Minister of State. He has supported many mental health charities and he does so much to support the Conservative Mental Health Group too as our President. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Mark. We really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Danny. I think it's a really good initiative.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we're very, very excited about it. I'm not sure how well I'll do as your host, but I'll try my best. So really, what I always think is really important when we're talking to MPs and what fascinates me is why MPs get involved in things like mental health, because for so long it's been an issue that's been in the shadows. People haven't spoken about it, and definitely not MPs themselves unless there's a major crisis. So what really interested you in mental health?
I think as a constituency member of Parliament, you see lots and lots of different problems come before you. But actually, the trick in many ways is to understand what the underlying issues are, not necessarily the particular topic that someone's come in to see you about. And after about 18 months, so I was elected first in 2001, I noticed that there were a number of issues that seemed to have common underlying themes. They were different in terms of the topic. So someone who was trapped in terms of being out of work for a long period, the role of voluntary carers looking after their partner, often late in their own lives, and also, for example, the worryingly high number of suicides in the farming industry. And though they're not the only ones, but those were all three areas where you started to realize that actually, although they're different topics, underlying each and every one of them is problems with mental health. And so, I think what I like about our constituency model as a parliament is that a lot of policy comes from the experience of having to deal with real world problems. And most MPs, regardless of party, frankly, tend to start to notice specific areas. And if something starts becoming a growing trend or something that they feel is there but hidden, then it tends to start to generate activity, and that then leads into national policy. And I actually think that's a good way of doing it. I think it also means that model means that even if you become a minister, I was a minister of state, but I always remember Margaret Thatcher used to say that even when she was prime minister, at the height of her powers, every Friday she would sit in a drafty village hall, well, not village in her case, but in a hall in Barnet. And people would bring their individual cases to her and their own particular, concerns. And I think what that does is it grounds you. It means that you don't get too detached from the day-to-day realities. And mental health came through time and time again, and that started to spark my interest. We have an excellent Samaritans team in East Hertfordshire. There's some very good community groups. Carers in Hertfordshire, which I was very happy to be an active supporter of, was also reporting an increasing number of people with mental health issues. So I think it was that realization that actually underlying a lot of other problems was a deep-seated issue and a hidden issue of mental health.
Absolutely. And, I was very interested on kind of what pressing areas of policy, but you really kind of summed it up there, that mental health really affects every single area of government, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think what has happened here is that, which is a good thing, the last 10 years, we've all become much more confident about talking about it, and both individually, but as a society, and it's become much more recognized. I think where we now need to move, if you like, what is the most pressing need, I think, is to start moving beyond that first phase of awareness and moving to the next stage of saying, okay, let's unpack what we mean by mental health conditions and mental health challenges, and start distinguishing between different conditions. And also, particularly, I think, to start distinguishing between those that should and are medicalized and those that perhaps are less significant in the round and less serious to the individual, that should be recognized and acknowledged and supported, but start to be a little bit more thoughtful about the different types of mental health, because my worry is that those with more serious conditions getting lumped in with people with lesser problems, and we're starting not to be able to come up with intelligent answers for different conditions. So I think we need to move beyond the sort of broad sweep of saying, hey, there's a problem in mental health, and just using the phrase mental health, and start moving towards some of the different conditions and start thinking about the different groups and the different approach, be a bit more sophisticated, I guess.
Absolutely, because of course we've seen in the media a lot recently. I mean, parliamentarians have come out left, right, and centre from all parties actually and talked about the
Yeah.
over medicalisation of kind of normative kind of human emotions and things like that. And I think I definitely agree with you that we do need to become more sophisticated around how we can best support people, whether it be mild mental illness or whether it be more severe illnesses, such as kind of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things like that, and how we can best
Yeah.
provide that support. I mean, one of the best initiatives I've probably seen recently is mental health hubs, which has been obviously supporting young people in the community as best they possibly can. So, I mean, obviously the next question I was kind of going to ask you is around kind of what pressing areas of policy, but you've kind of answered that in relation to we need to kind of become more sophisticated about that and how we think about policy and how we do that. But let's turn now to public life. I know this is an area we've spoken about quite a lot before, because being in public life is quite unique. You have a lot more experience than I do in being in public life, apart from my brief parliamentary candidate stint. But what are the unique challenges? What's so unique about public life, and why does it obviously test many people's mental health?
I think now I straddled the period, so I was elected in what was probably still largely an analog age, i.e., 2001. And I noticed, and I stepped down in 2019, and the sharp increase in the way in which we communicate and the way in which people lobby, shifting from correspondence in writing, post, and seeing people in person, to suddenly dealing with an array of different social media platforms, and the instant nature of that changed the dynamic. But it also opened up an opportunity for those people who might have a gripe and a groan at home to be able to effectively broadcast that. And there, I think, it's added to a problem. So public life, has many, many benefits, don't get me wrong. And I wouldn't want to put people off it. But I would also say that it can be, particularly a politician, it can be a very lonely existence, because you are getting abuse, and that social media has made that abuse far more intense and far more almost continuous. You can see this stream of people just shoving things out, and also it's been accelerated by bots and other. I'm going to say enemy action, but other behaviors and things that are not actually really related to real people in your own area. So you've got individuals who fear, this is members of parliament talking about the fact that they're having a problem. And they fear that because that will be seen as an issue of weakness, that will be picked on by people locally, by their political opponents. And so therefore the natural habit is to bottle it all up and not to admit it. And I think because it's a very personal thing when you are in politics. When people choose you as the MP, they choose you as a person. It is a personal selection. One can't get away from that. And when people vote for you, when people see you, they relate to you as an individual. So you do give of yourself. Well, all of which is fine when it's a positive environment and you feel you're making a change. The downside comes, I think, for most MPs when perhaps their party is in serious challenge. Maybe they've got a local, very aggressive campaign that they're on one side of, which means they're getting a lot of aggravation. And so this combination of abuse, a sense of loneliness and not being able to share with anybody, because you might think, well, MPs would feel able to talk to each other. And I think what's been good in the last 10 years is certain people, I think of my former parliamentary colleague, Charles Walker, former MP for Broxbourne, who has been willing and able to come out and say, this is what's happening to me. That has helped enormously because a lot of people have now felt able to express what they feel, um, and what they're sensing. And I think that has helped the process. But yeah, I mean, I think public office is intense, it's very personal, and it can feel, particularly if like a lot of politicians, you live, breathe, and eat it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you can feel that there's no escape. I mean, well, we'll come on to, how I sort of try to handle it, but I think for those in public office, and there'll be similar problems for anybody else in the public eye, social media now is, I'm afraid, it has many benefits, but it also has a dark side that I think we've all probably tripped over and discovered occasionally, though as politicians, it was a shock I would say the tipping point was 2015, 16, when suddenly Facebook went from being sort of a nice community thing to something that developed a really horrible, ugly side to it. Then Twitter came along, which was even more so. And, I mean, MPs do get abuse. So I had death threats in 2017. The man went to prison for GBH, and I wasn't his only target. And that's nothing by comparison to what some of the women members of Parliament put up with. So I think public office, I'm making it sound entirely terrible, but it has many good things, and you can make a difference. So I wouldn't put people off, but one shouldn't be ignorant of the fact that there will be significant abuse, that you have to really manage what you're seeing and hearing, and that you need to find a way to share what you're feeling, because I think too many MPs are terrified that it will be a sign of weakness. He's not coping, he's not up to the job, blah, 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 and it starts to weigh in on you very heavily.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to, obviously, I'm going to give a shout out to Charles Walker as well. You mentioned him just before that. I remember that speech because it was in 2012 when he talked about his OCD. And it was such a massive impact on a lot of people with mental health problems, including myself, who was experiencing, ironically, OCD at the time. So it was really a big thing. But you're completely right. I mean, social media is puts immense pressure on members of Parliament. I mean, you see it every single day. I mean, even as a parliamentary candidate, I remember. I mean, I was announcing my candidacy in Liverpool Garston, I must admit. But 1,500 nasty comments overnight, and that's that. And obviously, the other side, kind of the unique 24/7 nature of politics, and that kind of leads on to the next section. I mean, how did you deal with that? Because I think a lot of people listening to what you've just said will think, is it worth it? Is it worth it to go through that process? And
I think it still is. I mean, I tend to caution people a little bit, say, look, I know you want to do this, and I think you'd be good. Just be aware of this. What I would say is it's really important that you have supportive family and friends there, or a partner who you're able to share. I was very thankful that I have a very supportive wife who's got her feet on the ground, to tell me when I'm being a twit, which is very important. Preferably not on a daily basis, but and I think that's important. I think having friends outside of politics and trying to maintain that, to step out of the bubble, to realize that there are other things, and that actually this sense that somehow you're in this world in which everybody thinks wants you dead or some terrible thing, is actually a tiny microcosm, and it's not reality. It's not the reality. I remember the 2015 election where online I was being accused of being a child murderer, blah, 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 all these things. And you're thinking, where's this suddenly coming from? And then actually I was out on the doorstep and on the doorstep with real people. Yes, of course there were people who were supporting other parties or whatever, or wanted to talk about things, but none of that. And you suddenly realize there's a very different thing. There's this parallel world which is quite narrow and is generating negative activity. So I think also what helped me was that I knew I could earn a living outside of politics. I had done before. And therefore, I knew that if I really wasn't enjoying it anymore, that I could step away from it. And I think knowing that, because the danger of someone being in politics is what they've aspired to do, they've got there, it feels like their whole life. And if that life then turns really bitter and sour, then the sense of entrapment and it can be very destructive. So I think it's really important to have that balance, to see things in perspective, to get other perspectives. Why one of the reasons I encouraged me to go and do professional coaching with the business world post politics is that ability to have somebody from the outside seeing your world with a different perspective and helping shine a different angle on things, which I think is actually quite an important part of some mental health therapies.
Absolutely. And just touch on that. I mean, I spend a lot of time with people who are very engaged in politics, and very poor. I mean, for a lot of kind of younger people coming up who aspire to, being in public life and being an
Yeah.
MP, what would your advice be to them? I mean, I'm listening on this one because I definitely need some advice on this. What would be your advice to kind of protect your mental health, but also be able to kind of thrive in this environment that is, as you've already alluded to, very, very testing?
Yeah, I think one of the things when I wanted to be in politics when I was 17, 16, 17, 18, this was the 1970s when the lights got switched off and so on. So politics was very immediate. And my parents said, that's fine, with a degree of caution, but let's build another career to start with. And then you can go in a little bit later and you've got something to fall back on if it doesn't work. And that worked very well, and it was good advice. It also works because it means that when you do get to standing for Parliament in a winnable seat, so you've got a really good chance. You've got a little bit of other parts of your life in place. You've got some foundations, and it might be that you're in a relationship. It might be that you've done some work in another environment. So you come to politics with a bit more to offer. You've got some experience to bring, but also you've got some devices and you've learned how to cope in life. I worry with those some couple of the Labour MPs who come in their very early 20s and they may be okay, but the record is not good for young MPs. I think you need to have got a little bit of ballast, a little bit of foundation in place. So that doesn't mean don't do politics outside of what you're doing and aim to go there. That's fine. But I would go and get some foundation, go and get a taste of other things in life, go and get some balance. And so you've got that politics, you're involved, it's exciting, it's fun. You aspire to go on to become maybe a senior councillor and then maybe a member of parliament. That's all great. But have some foundations because if it doesn't work out, and it can be a very chancy business, you've got something to fall back on. Not everything is. And also, I think also if you've got choices, you can be a better MP. If you're not completely beholden and you've got to hold on to your role, either financially or just from a personal ambition point of view, then the chances are you may end up compromising in a way that you actually bitterly regret. Whereas if you've got that little bit of freedom, that you are your own agent, your own master, then you are able to do the thing you think is right. Because you've got that little bit. So I would say to most people, by all means, get involved, be active in politics in your 20s, but go and build something else whilst you're doing that and enjoy it. That's what I did. I was very much involved as a campaigner in my 20s and then started to stand once I was sort of getting into my 30s. Is that right? Yes. Where are we? 80. Yeah, so I stood in 92. Yeah, so that's about right. That was my first candidacy. That was in Newham Northwest. So yeah, go get some other things, strings to your bow, as it were. So when you do come to running for serious seats, you bring something that you can, to bring into Westminster, which is good for Parliament, but also means you've got something. You've got that hinterland, I think the phrase used to be in the 70s. You've got a partner or good friends or whatever that mean that politics isn't the only thing, which is quite important because it can drain you if you're not very careful.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's interesting you mentioned a lot of the kind of younger MPs going in. And on the one hand, you want to encourage young people to engage in politics and engage in public life, but there's also inevitably a risk associated with that because, as you've alluded to, the amount of pressure, the amount of stress that being an MP entails, there is a risk that people are kind of ill prepared for that level of scrutiny and that
Yeah.
level of stress, which is
And I
definitely
think
something. Yes.
I think the other thing as well is, in your early mid 20s, inevitably you're going to, there's going to be the odd evening, shall we say, that you wouldn't necessarily want to have broadcast on, you know, uh, and we've all been there. And my worry is that because everybody has a camera everywhere and a microphone everywhere, that silly behavior on a wet Tuesday evening in a pub suddenly is broadcast. And I just think it's a shame. I think we should all be able to go do silly things when we're younger and get it out of our head. It doesn't mean we won't do them when we're older, but that scrutiny now is so intense, so continuous that you can, I just think it's wiser probably to get all that out of your system, as it were, before you start, because the scrutiny will be intense. And then depends if some people don't give a monkeys about it. Boris, let's be honest, wouldn't worry about any of that kind of stuff. And maybe he's right, but I think most people would, if that's something, some video. Well, look at Mike Amesbury. A stupid moment, and quite wrong. But what we don't know, of course, behind that is whether that person had been badgering him hours and hours and hours, and he lost his rag. Shouldn't have done it. Completely wrong. But that's the world we live in, and so I think I would just say enjoy, get involved, be a campaigner, but don't try to get in too early because I think you may come to regret it.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely something that comes up a lot. Sorry, I keep reverting back to kind of young, but I think it's a really interesting area because it all links into how
Mm.
to deal with that kind of pressure in public life. Like, a
Yeah.
lot of younger candidates or former candidates who are kind of coming up, you tell them, and they're terrified to do anything. They're terrified to even almost live in any normal way, shape, or form because they're worried that if they
Exactly.
do X, Y, and Z, that inevitably that'll lead to their political career being over before it's even
Yeah.
started. And it's really hard to kind of get around that because inevitably that leads to further stress and further pressure because you're not really living a normal
Exactly.
existence.
So, I mean, I'm very glad my teenage years, university years were not in the digital camera age. I dread to think that there are some photographs of the stag weekend in Amsterdam, but they're under lock and key. But yeah, I look, that's why I think, you know, people should be able to go and enjoy themselves and have fun. And occasionally that means they're going to do something dumb. We all do. No one's perfect. And I would be very suspicious, actually, frankly, of people who haven't, because the danger then is they may get chucked out by the electorate through no fault of their own. I mean, I think of some of the Labour MPs who've been elected last year. The truth is that some of those very young ones, they're in very marginal seats. Even if Labour wins again next time, the chances are they're going to lose their seat. So they'll be in and out in their mid 20s. And then what? Being an ex-MP is not a great passport to fame and fortune, I can tell you. Some do, but it is not. So I've just been helping 30 of our former colleagues make that transition after the 24 election. and it's a tough gig. It's a tough gig. So my view was enjoy yourself in the 20s, enjoy the campaigning. Then when you're ready and you've got a partner in life, you've got a bit of a base, a little bit of a foundation, that's the time to seriously think about doing it. Because also when you get to the selection process, and we've drifted slightly into selection procedure, but if I was a selector in the local association, I'd be thinking to myself, okay, so what does this person bring? What experience can they bring to Parliament? Are they used to running things? Do they know how things work? Um, what can they show me in terms of their executive experience? Or have they run anything? So, that's and you'll be up against people who have.
Mm.
So my general would be is by all means get involved, learn. I stood in Newham Northwest. Tony Banks, the Labour MP, they're huge Labour majority, great experience, and you've stood as well. So and you can learn a huge amount from that because being a candidate is a very different thing from being a campaigner.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a shout out to the candidate in Hazel Grove who showed me so much, gave me so much experience around that as well, supporting him,
Mm,
which was really really good. And it's definitely something I think we should do more of, especially for younger candidates, getting that experience from more experienced individuals who are standing in other seats
yeah.
as well, which I
Big
thought.
fan of mentoring. I do mentor, albeit not necessarily political candidates, but I do mentor tech startup founders for that very reason, because I've set up. I've no skin in the game, so I'm
Mm.
going to tell them what I actually think and not what I think they want me to say.
Absolutely, absolutely. Perfect. Okay, well, we're going to move on to the Conservative Party because, after all, this is
Yeah, okay.
called Feeling Blue, which is definitely well. I coined the name. I'm not sure how effective it is, but we'll see.
No, it's good. I like it.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. Perfect. So obviously, mental health over the last we talk a lot about the last 14 years, but over the last 14 years, when we've had a coalition and consecutive Conservative governments, mental health has really, shot up in the kind of parliamentary's imagination. We've had the No Health Without Mental Health. We had talk about parity of esteem in the Health and Social Care Act. Onwards and onwards and onwards and onwards. Theresa May made it a primary thing for her on the steps of Downing Street. And it's been a major thing. But do you think the Conservative Party take mental health seriously enough? Do you think? Or do you think they could do a lot more to really look at it, engage with it, and make it kind of a core policy area?
I think it has become much better at it. I think in the 2001 period to probably to 2005 wasn't really an issue, but that I think I would argue probably reflected society generally.
Mm.
It has come on, and I think people like Charles and others who have made an individual story have helped that. I think also at a personal level between members, where colleagues have had, and I can think of at least two people who've had, quite a serious episode mentally. I think there has been a realization that actually this is for real, and we need to think about it, and we need to engage. So I think it is understood, and I thought we were making some good progress with some of our health ministers, despite all the other things going on in the parliamentary party, in the government up to 2024. I think where we now need to move is clarifying our stance on this, particularly this issue we talked about at the top about the normalized conditions and the or normalized behaviors and medical conditions, and start just to so almost to unpack that and say, right, in these particular areas, this is the thing, this is the direction we want to take, and in these particular areas, this is the direction we want to start becoming a little bit more sophisticated, so that we move beyond just saying, oh yes, we're in favor of doing something about mental health. And actually starting to drill down. And I hope that the policy reviews that Kemi Badenoch has started to launch now would include that, particularly in terms of the culture within the NHS.
Mm.
Because I think although there are some very good bright spots within the NHS and mental health treatment, nevertheless, there are I think some still areas where the approach, particularly at GP level, is
Mm,
pretty, there's a very varied experience for people. And I think the hubs that you've talked about, I think there's a lot of merit in that. Um, and I think there's an area now to drill down, as it were. But yeah, I think the party does get it. I think the
yeah.
party does get it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of things there. I mean, obviously, I'm always going to be a fan of the mental health hubs. It's one of my favorite areas. But there also seems to be there's still an over reliance on in certain areas on kind of pharmacological interventions, drugs for people, especially at the
Mm.
primary care level, where GPs are struggling to
Yes.
get people support, whether it be psychological therapies or whatever. But there's also seems to be a lack of focus on prevention and actually recognizing how we can prevent, especially young people in this day and age who
Yeah.
are under immense pressure from
Yeah.
ever experiencing mental health. And I think the school-based support teams were a good area for that as well to try and do it. Also introduced under the Conservatives as well. So how do we? I mean, you've kind of touched on this, but it's really important that we make sure it remains a priority in the Conservative Party. And one of my kind of token lines I always say to people is, look, it costs the economy, over £100 billion every single year. Lost
Yeah.
productivity, high absenteeism, social security. And that seems to be the tokenistic line that I kind of use as a means of getting Conservatives on board. But, is there other ways in which we can make sure, other than the economics of it, make sure that we keep Conservatives on board in this project? Because there seems to be something I felt, a slight reluctance now to engage in it, or a sense that, just pull your socks up, it will be okay kind of thing.
Yes, I mean, I suspect there's a generational issue here that those people in their 70s plus would tend to be the pull your socks up brigade. And I think this is why I think if we can break down the language and distinguish between different conditions and start having tailored answers for those, we get over that hump. Because the problem is, if you lump everything together, then I can understand that some people may feel that, oh, I hear all this talk about mental health, and I met this person, and to me, it seemed that what they really need to do was to, get out, get away from that person that they're constantly having difficulties with, put their phone down, and get a better balance in their life. Some of that advice, which may have some merit, but it becomes dismissive because the presumption is that all these people are like this, and if only they just manage to pull themselves together. And I think that's why we need to move beyond the general and focus on the specific. I mean, I do personally think that we do as a party need to think quite carefully about phone-free times, especially for younger people. They're not all. I mean, look, if you look at the time we all spend on our iPads, iPhones, whatever, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, making sure that you have what I call downtime when you're not looking at the phone, you're not dealing with it, is important. And I do think, much as it's naturally for me as a conservative to be against banning things, I do think making sure that children in schools are free of this habit, because it is a habit. We have become engaged in a habit that is very addictive, and unfortunately, that then draws us into behaviors that are actually unhealthy for us. I'm making a general sweeping phrase there. So I think the way we get over the hump of people saying, trying to dismiss it, or, as I say, the older generation tending to think that would be to actually come up with some specific things for specific conditions and specific circumstances, which I think most people would embrace quite quickly. So, and a lot of it, you're right. I think one of my frustrations with the NHS tends to be one that pharmacological answers tend to be the immediate leap to the first default, and two that the language around our health, it doesn't start often enough in my book with prevention and the things that we can do for ourselves. I'm personally not sure that the current financial model for the NHS works. And I do think we need to have a much greater emphasis in all healthcare on prevention, and that revolves around our own habits. And that may be what we eat, maybe what exercise we do or don't take. It may be that we smoke. But then in terms of mental health, it's are we giving our brains a break from this endless series of images that we're constantly pouring through, which means that our concentration has diminished. I mean, I would say to you that in the last 10 years, I think my willingness to watch a film over 2 hours has diminished completely. So my patience is gone, and I can sense that. Now that's not wholly healthy, unhealthy, but so I think there are things we can do, and I think one of the issues where actually all the generations probably would agree is working out easy things for people to adopt as habits, which free us from being so addicted to the next image on our phone.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously, we're thinking. You mentioned about the NHS. We have to move towards prevention, don't we? Really, I mean, it's if we're talking about the funding model and how if we want to
Yeah.
make the NHS sustainable, prevention's the obvious thing. I mean, I don't know if I've said this before, but I was always a massive fan of the big society model that you could
Oh yes.
decentralize
Yeah.
support locally, and local charities, local businesses could all support this kind of prevention of things like that. I'm not sure if some of my colleagues would agree with me on the big society, but we'll see. That was my idea around prevention. But yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned also phones as well. Phones have become a massive part. I mean, it shocks me, how sophisticated the algorithms are now on social media, and the pressure that's being put
Yeah.
on young people. I mean, I had my own issues with technology when I was younger, but goodness me, I'm so glad I'm not young now, because it is absolutely terrifying what's happening. So it's definitely something that we need to look at moving forward. I mean, just to now kind of go kind of full circle around where we are at around mental health and kind of where we need to go. Obviously, you are president of the Conservative Mental Health Group, which
Mm.
you've done a fantastic job, and I've seen that firsthand. I mean, moving forward, generally, what would be your advice to anyone who may be going through a difficult time at the moment? Because there is a lot of people right now who are experiencing, that we've seen a massive rise in mental illness, and there are people who experience that, and there may be alternative reasons for that that we've
Mm.
already discussed. But what would be your advice to someone going through a really difficult time now?
Well, I'm no clinical expert, but I think what I would say with two things is one is make sure there's somebody that you can talk this through with and be completely open with them, whatever the issue is. And two, give yourself a break from social media and almost book it in. Say that from 6 till 7, I put the phone down, put it away somewhere. And actually, what's funny is and maybe ideally, you say that 3 evenings in the week, I don't look at my phone. And give yourself that target. It's a little bit it's sometimes it can be difficult to build a habit that's about not doing something. So it may be that actually what you want to do is to say, right, I'm going to go and do. I mean, I now do in my grand age of I do some Tai Chi on a Wednesday evening,
Amazing.
and it's an hour and a half. When I'm not looking at anything because I'm trying to do all my various stances and poses and so on and so forth, and my making sure my meditation is good, and actually it's very freeing. It's a good. Whereas if I'm at home, I'm watching the telly. I probably scroll, having a quick look at whatever's in on social media. So I'm absorbing images and so on and so forth. And the telly is always these days very unlikely to be broadcast. So I would say one, find yourself somebody you can talk to about this and about what you're really feeling about it, and be able to confide in that person. And two, give yourself a break. Make sure that at least an hour every day you don't look at it. And the way I think the easiest habit to build, as I say, is not just to say, right, I'm putting it down, and now I'm sitting here thinking, what the hell do I do with myself for the next hour? But instead, I mean, I read more now with real books. There was a period 5 or 10 years ago when I thought, oh, I'm not going to need books anymore. I'm going to be all online. But actually, the tangible nature of holding a book is a different experience, and that's good. So I think if you know there are certain times in your day when you tend to become completely absorbed in this, try and pick something that means you can't do it. I mean, the great thing with running can be good, although you can be quite inward. So I think it's doing a social activity where you have to engage with other people, which you enjoy, and which means that you're getting a break from that social media input, because I think that will just help you get a sense of a different perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned not to do too much more running, because you know me, I've run a bit too
You're a
much.
keen runner. Oh,
I
absolutely.
have a keen
But I
run.
mean,
Go on.
and do you find that's a good time to think, or is the first half an hour kind of just clearing your head of monkey thoughts and then you get into it, or how do you find that process?
Yeah, I find it's kind of one of those things that just kind of you think of nothing really, and when you've got so many things kind of pressing things that you
Yeah,
need to do, it's quite nice to just kind of look around a bit. I think they call it
yeah,
mindfulness now, but actually
yes,
just experiencing what's around you, other people, and not kind of focusing on yourself for 10 minutes is
yeah,
actually
yeah.
is good.
I don't run because I
Mm,
did my Achilles. I do hike, and I find actually I do take headphones to listen to some podcasts, but usually the first hour or so, it's just nice to be in the moment.
yeah,
And actually to be aware of the animals around you, and particularly because I tend to walk on my own, I tend to see a lot of wildlife where I am. So I will probably see, we have several herds of deer, big herds north of us, and on numerous occasions, because I'm walking on my own and I'm quite quiet. I've stumbled along across many of them, muntjac, badgers, all kinds of the red kites, whole raft of different things, and it's just you and them.
yeah.
And so that is a really good time when I'm not engaged in social media, not thinking about it. Don't really, care. I think the difficulty as well is that social media and politics, because you're always thinking of what's happening next, and what has he said, and oh, and so-and-so's resigned, and blah 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 blah. It becomes a treadmill,
Yeah.
and you need to find that moment to step off.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, and it could actually be an actual treadmill when you're doing that. Absolutely. Right, Mark, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and we couldn't think of anyone better at the Conservative Mental Health Group to have our very own president as our first guest. So I really, really appreciate that. For everyone listening, the Conservative Mental Health Group Feeling Blue podcast will be back with episode 2, and we'll let you know who will be on that podcast very, very soon. But for now, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show and for all your advice there. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you to you and all the other officers who are making the mental health group such a success. It's been a really good thing to see, and I've been very happy just to be there as a little bit of grey hair to hopefully make sure we grow and prosper in the years to come.
Yeah, it wouldn't be possible without you. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.